Hello and welcome to our 65th episode of the Gutenberg Changelog podcast. In today's episode, we will talk about Gutenberg 13, WordPress 6.0, inline token proposal, and so much more. I'm Birgit Pauli-Hart, curator at the Gutenberg Times and WordPress developer advocate. And I'm here with my co-host, Mary Job, WordPress advocate, support engineer at Paid Membership Pro, and community organizer of WP Africa. Also with us is today Dennis Snell, software design engineer working deeply in Gutenberg, WordPress core contributor and JavaScript wrangler at Automatic. Good evening, Mary. Good afternoon, Dennis. Welcome to our show. Seems we all three are kind of digital nomads at the moment. So how is everyone today and where are you located and how is your weather? 3 questions right out of the gate. Mary, you want to start?
Yes, I'm doing great, Birgit. Thank you very much. I'm right now in Kigali, Rwanda. The weather is quite better than in Nigeria. It's not known to be hot over here. It's usually cold, but not too cold. And I'm doing good. Thank you for asking.
All right, Dennis.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on here. I'm currently in Tucson, Arizona until tomorrow. And the weather is sunny. The high today is around 30. For all my colleagues here in the US, that's around 85 degrees. Yeah. And I'm having a blast working on some blocks, working on implementing Gutenberg and context outside of WordPress. I look forward to this chat today.
Yeah, well, it's such a great pleasure to have you, Dennis. And thanks for joining us and for the discussion of this week's Gutenberg release and your inline token proposal. But before we start going into the details of both, tell us and our listeners a bit about you, Dennis. How did you get to work on WordPress and with Automatic?
I have a somewhat traditional WordPress entry story. Long ago, I was building web pages for my clients and wanted to give them more opportunities to edit their content. So I had a hodgepodge of home-built, naively implemented content management systems. And when I stumbled upon WordPress, it seemed so easy in order to do what I needed. And so basically from the moment I found WordPress, I almost exclusively used it for the websites I was building. Down the line, I was working at an electric utility as an engineer and just really wasn't getting enough programming in my day job to meet my wants, since programming is kind of a passion of mine. And so I wanted to find work that would let me dive deep into programming challenges, really deep. And I was also looking to find a job that would give me more flexibility to do what I wanted with my day schedule and better meet my work habits. Again, schedule, I work at night a lot. So Automatic had been on my radar for a number of years, and it was kind of like the pie in the sky dream I had. I applied and basically said, I have no professional programming experience, but things worked out quite well. So that's how I got to Automatic. It wasn't something I expected to get, but it's been a good 8 years now that I've been there.
Wow, 8 years. That company has definitely grown in those 8 years. Awesome. Well, yeah, you were right at the beginning, if I remember that correctly, of Gutenberg, and you must know all the depth of the project. I still share your article, Gutenberg is not HTML, from September 2017, where, and for someone like me who wrote HTML code manually at the web's beginning, and that was quite a conceptual jump to wrap my head around. It's one of the many conceptual rethinking that was done with the development of Gutenberg, so on how content is created with blocks. So I highly recommend the post to any developer who wants to learn building blocks or for the block editor. But it's just the beginning. So Dennis, what other revolutionary concepts implemented with the block editor are difficult for developers of the early internet days, or backend developers or PHP developers? And do you have any advice for them how to learn this better, faster?
A quick call out to the listeners who don't get the opportunity to read that article before I start answering my question is that I'll point out that what I consider one of the more revolutionary concepts here is just that we see HTML on the web as the formatting language, and it is, but it's a very low level language in the way that assembly code is a very low level programming language. And with the Gutenberg block model, we've been able to kind of heighten the level at which we describe the content we're creating. And so while the image tag is absolutely the way to display an image in HTML most of the time, in Gutenberg, we're saying that's kind of an implementation artifact of the fact that we're trying to create an image in our document. And the same way goes for other content types that get more complicated. Other revolutionary concepts, I'm not sure they're revolutionary so much as reflectionary.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that I walked through in my programming journey on the web, and that I've seen a lot of us do, is I think when the web became a popular thing and HTML became the language we speak, we almost didn't recognize the traditional programming practices that had guarded us in more typical software, concepts around modularization, concepts around organization and design. We didn't realize those could also transfer into how we generate web content and web pages. We can recognize this in the way that we mix HTML and PHP, and even some of the bad rap that WordPress gets for mashing together those different things. None of this stuff had to happen. In fact, even back in the early days where everybody was writing Perl scripts, it was so easy to mix and match content and logic and presentation that we just did it out of convenience. With the block model and with the editor's data model, what we've tried to do is make the easy option operating on these more designed, structured interfaces. The fact that this is all stored in HTML, going back to that article, is kind of beside the point. The point is we're able to interact with our modern expectations for creating web content. That's things like being able to be responsive on different devices, being able to be progressively enhanced, interacting with other web pages and services out there. We can do this in a way that is principled by the default path. And to me, that's one of the biggest impacts that we've had. I think a lot of this stuff was a little nebulous in the beginning. It was an experiment. Can we do this? Can we build a structured system? Can we make it work? Can we do it without breaking backwards compatibility? Can we do it while preserving the openness that we love so much about the web? And for the most part, it's worked out really well. And I think that probably deserves a lot of consideration and appreciation as we move forward.
Yeah, well, awesome. It's also there's a similar movement to modularize and to structure and to systemize also in designer systems or design systems, starting with the atomic design. And I think those principles actually matched up with Gutenberg. So I think that is where the web and the development on the web was going early on, but bringing it to WordPress, that the monolith WordPress all of a sudden, and then breaking it up into smaller pieces that then are assembled again. So that has been a 6-year, maybe even 7-year journey for you.
I looked that up recently. I think it's somewhere around there. Yeah.
So you have been with Automatic for 8 years, so pretty much 3/4 of your time you spend on Gutenberg, and the revamp of how you create content in WordPress. So was there anything when you, I don't know if you have it on top of your head or have thought about it, was there anything that you started out thinking about and how this and implement with the team, Matthias and Jagos and Riyad and all them, where you were surprised how it kind of turned out after, I don't know, 100 iterations or 100 plugin releases?
I was skeptical in the beginning of our JSON comments inside of the block comment delimiters. And I was skeptical about how that would all go down. And really what became, I should say, the driving force behind that were the practical considerations brought in by, thankfully, the diversity of input at the time among the WordPress community to say, hey, we care about backwards compatibility. We care about openness. We care about having one source of truth. And so, like I mentioned, I went back to those early discussions in Slack, which are still publicly available. And we had a lot of discussion about how we would fundamentally store Gutenberg posts. And there was a strong argument in favor of creating a JSON data format that would be stored in the database. There were arguments for storing block information separately from the post content. There were discussions about storing all of the attributes and data at the top or the bottom of the post in a delineated area. And so I think what's neat about how this all developed is just getting input from a lot of different people forced us through these constraints. Okay, but what happens when you export your site? What happens when you don't have the software anymore? What happens when you're trying to archive these pages long term? And I don't remember when I was fully won over to the idea. It was after we built the initial models of it, but that one I think is still neat and what I consider one of those happy accidents or happy experiments in history.
Yeah, and I still marvel at the 5.0 release in December 2018 when nothing broke. The internet did not break with WordPress 5.0, and the conversion of classic content into blocks was very, very seamless. Yeah, you could open up and that was really surprising to me, because normally when you change these technical paradigms, then there is a strong break of backwards compatibility, and this is definitely a great step for that. It's still the wonders when I touch a site that still use the classic editor and I convert it to block to Gutenberg. Yeah, it's they're still totally amazing to me. Well, yeah, so, well, I think we could both talk quite a bit, and maybe we get a chance to talk a little bit further into it, but we have a job to do tonight. Or for me, that we have the Gutenberg 13 release. But before we go in there, I think we need to walk through the happenings of last week. There was a recording of the April of the walkthrough, April 5th, of what's possibly or not possibly to come in WordPress 6.0. And the recording is now available on WordPress TV. And then Soshin published a 6.0 product walkthrough recap with summary and issues list and the chat transcript as well as the video transcript. So to get a sneak peek at what is coming to WordPress 6.0, what might still need some work before it's available in core, check it out. And it's about an hour long. So you get definitely a sneak peek and see Matthias Ventura, still the demo master of live demos in that show. Did you watch it, Mary or Dennis? Did you get a chance to look at it?
I didn't have a chance to look at it, no.
I haven't been able to watch it either.
All right. So let me tell you about the highlights then. There is the WordPress 6.0 beta came out also this week. And later on, we will have some test calls for testing. But the highlights of the sneak peek was that the style switching is coming with that a theme developer can give you multiple theme JSON files and change the nature of a theme. So you don't need to change the theme if you just want to change the color palette or some typography or the graphical outlook of it, which is still really amazing. And it's going to have some great creativity coming into the fold. Then you get more template options. You can use the blocks to edit 5 more templates: the author template, date, categories, tag, and any other taxonomy template. So that is definitely a relief for a few, and a few people have been waiting for, few millions, I think. So, and then you can easily select text across multiple blocks now and edit them to a liking or delete them. Then there has been great efforts made to keep custom styles in place when blocks are transformed into other blocks, like from paragraph to list, or from group to cover, or a button, so you don't have to replicate all the settings again. More patterns will come into place with a quick inserter that surfaces patterns for it's certain relevant semantic kind of thing. I haven't seen that yet. I kind of will see how the mind reading works from the developers. The list view will have some improvements, and there will be some design tools. There will also be new blocks: the comments block, the read more block, the post author biography block, and then the whole block locking UI will come into WordPress 6.0. And last but not least, what we saw latest also coming in 12.9 is the export of themes that you created or modified with the site editor. So a question for you all: is there anything that you're particularly looking forward to seeing land in WordPress core?
I'm excited about a few things. I don't know if you want to go first, Mary, but
well, go for it, Dennis.
I don't think we can understate how valuable the partial text selection is going to be. Great work. They're just super valuable for, I think, everyone, because that's something that we kind of lost when you're trying to select across multiple blocks, but you don't want everything. There's a switchover that we've had that it defaults to selecting the block instead of the text within the block. So that's going to be incredible. And that's, I think, going to make it easier to adopt Gutenberg in even more contexts, because those are kind of expectations that people have. By the way, that's not an easy problem. And so it's going to continue to get better, but it's a hard problem to solve in these web-based editors.
Yeah, I saw a comment that Notion, that's a project management note-taking kind of application, that they just after 10 years or so had that feature. They didn't have it before either. So it's really a hard thing to do. And having that now in the block editor is definitely something that will improve the writing experience considerably, because that's one of the things that I heard a lot of people who write in the classic editor, they were kind of surprised that wasn't working, and it kind of threw them a bit.
Yeah, apart from that, I'm really excited about some of the underpinnings that we're seeing with these style variations to make it easier to more interactively adjust different elements of your site's theme non-destructively, to be able to kind of move sliders and visually see the feedback and close this cycle of, okay, anticipate what change might have, code in some value, reload the site. Instead we can just flip back and forth in real time and see that. And I'm also excited about the bit that we'll talk about later that I put in there, which is just preserving broken blocks, because I'm not the only one who's ever hit save on a post and immediately after save realized that the block I just wrote is now broken. So we're doing a lot of work actually to support other changes going on in future releases, but we're doing a lot of work to make sure that if the editor is unable to understand what's loaded in post content, that it doesn't change that or get rid of it. So those are the three big ones for me.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. We're talking about that a little bit more when we come to the changelog of 13. Mary, what is it that you are looking forward to 6.0?
I think Dennis already hit the nail on the spot. It's that more to select, being able to select. You don't know how many times I've tried to select a block and then I have to take them like one by one, and I'm like, why can't I select all of this at once? But I quite understand when it says it might look simple, but it's difficult to achieve, because if there's one thing that I've come to realize since doing WordPress support is that the simplest of the problems are the ones that you end up spending the most amount of time on, because you underestimated it. So I can relate to that. But I'm excited about that future, and honestly, I can't say thank you enough to all the people who are working on Gutenberg.
Yeah, and I'm looking really forward to all the list view improvements, because that has been the power tool that I saw, and that has gotten so many small improvements that make working with it so smooth and easy to navigate your big template or your big posts. That there's some really great changes in there. All right. So as I mentioned, the WordPress 6.0 beta 1 has come out. And dear listeners, you are our core team. We need you because the release team has published not one, but 3 calls for testing. One is titled Help Wanted, Test WordPress 6.0. That's the direct testing of the beta versions, not only the beta 1. Next week, we will have April 19th, we will have beta 2, and then later the release schedule, the release candidates. So we have that post, and it walks you through testing environment, testing tips, then the key features to test, the editor, the blocks, the design, and the theme plugin development or backwards compatibility to how the plugins and themes work with 6.0. It has been a great in great detail, so you don't have to come up with making all the decisions. What exactly do I have to test? That is really a great post to follow along. Then Anne McCarthy has, from the full site editing outreach program, the call for testing 13 out, which walks you through authoring an author template. That's one of the 5 templates you will come to WordPress 6.0, but it will also walk you through testing the blocks block UI, as well as customized no results for the query block and more design tools. Again, Anne McCarthy has some very detailed instructions for you. And last but not least, help test the custom blocks for WordPress 6.0. So up until now, we had one block for the post comments to add to a template or to a theme. But there was a team of developers who started out making, similar to the post template, having each data item like the content, the author, the date, the link, all in individual blocks. And now those can be styled, those can be used much more granular in your decisions. So, but it needs testing, definitely, because, and the testing will also decide if it will come to 6.0. So that's definitely, you got your work cut out for you, dear listeners, if you wanted to heed all those calls for testing. And then there has also been on the Make blog an update on the state of the discussion and the explorations for standardizing styles and presets for themes. There was there's a whole proposal was there from Mark Root Wiley, and there were comments and also some problems that theme authors kind of anticipate with the full site editing, that they needed to be standardized, and the customizations being it typography, being it's how will primary and secondary color change? Yeah, are these names, can they be standardized? How custom CSS will be coming into or dealing with blocks and full site editing. So there is definitely, so Ramon has published a post where he summarizes not only the challenge, but also has links to the first explorations and the PRs that you can follow along with and test them. This is all under the big headline style engine for WordPress and Gutenberg. He also has a section there, how to get involved. So definitely check it out if you want to be at the forefront of the discussion and decision making. So what's released? There were 3 releases. One was the WordPress 5.9.3. If you haven't updated yet, or if you haven't updated automatically, stop now, listening to this, go and update your websites to 5.9.3 security and maintenance release with a few bug fixes. If you want to hold off on 6.0 when it comes out, you definitely want to have the bug fixes that were backported from the block editor. And we will have the link in the show notes for the list of changes that come in 5.9.3. But so now that you're back from updating, WordPress 6.0 beta came out, and we will have the link to the beta release notes. And of course, we have all the calls for testing for that in our show notes. And now we come to Gutenberg 13. It's Adam Zielinski led this release and published a release post on the Make blog on April 14th. So that was after beta, but all the features that went in Gutenberg 13 is the last plugin version that which of the features and enhancements make it into WordPress 6.0. Afterwards will only be bug fixes and the like. And Jagos Chilkovsky, our friend here, a long-time co-host, also handled the merge in time for the beta 1 release into core. And there are also a few things that might not make it, few things in this release that might not make it into WordPress 6.0, and we will point them out as much as we know. But this is quite the big release. It's 234 PRs. Or no, it's 234 line items in the changelog. That's about a mile long by 70 contributors with alone enhancements were 90 of that. So that's really something. So do you want to start out, Mary, in the enhancements of the block library?
Okay, Birgit. So we have a couple of announcements. I'll start with the block library. Yearly, weekly, and daily archive settings have been added to the archives block. We also have an announcement to the code editor, which now preserves the source of unrecognized blocks inside of the code editor.
Well, as alluded to just a little bit ago, this is the preservation work for what I like to call unrecognized blocks. The editor calls invalid blocks or missing blocks. And just the idea is, it's a workflow that I hit more often, I think, than a lot of people, just because I'm often wanting to go in and play with markup changes, or I'm developing a block and it's undergoing periodic changes, or I want to see, what if I made this change, both in the code editor and in the visual side. Now, if your blocks are marked as invalid by the editor, it won't touch that. It'll basically just leave it as is. So in the code editor, there was this funny behavior where if you went in and made an edit and for some reason it didn't validate properly, as soon as you left the code text area, the content you wrote just either disappear or change or get corrupted somehow. So right now, it's going to treat that just as your plain notebook text editor. It may still mark the block as invalid, but as far as the editor goes, whatever you type is going to stay around. So a lot fewer headaches for me for that. And then, the partner to that is on the visual side. if a block breaks, it's going to show the HTML preview. And for ever since the origin of the project, it might show the HTML preview if you're lucky enough, but it was regenerating that block content from the attributes that the editor already knew it didn't recognize. So just a little note there is that if something is broken, it'll leave it broken, and that's makes me that makes me excited beyond probably what it should.
Yeah, and I think the one stepping stone or that a lot of developers found was actually the deprecation of blocks, the whole versioning system of the static blocks. And it's so cumbersome for many developers that they decided to go with dynamic blocks right out of the gate, or after they went through it with their first block, and render from the front end from the PHP, which then kind of circumvent that. But it also has a downside that it might take another trip to the server to actually show it, and slows down the content creator. So I think you're doing God's work there, and angels are working on it to make that experience a little less daunting for a developer. I see blocks that have these big separate file that the deprecation of blocks versioning system, where that part could be longer than actually the rest of the plugin.
One other note on that is it has been very difficult to create invalid or unrecognized content in the editor up until now. And we often talk about the code view and the fact that this is all stored as serialized HTML in post content as kind of escape hatch. If there's something that you really need to do and the editor doesn't support it, and you're writing post and you just need to get this published by Friday, you can now go into that code editor and add your custom HTML to your paragraph block. And effectively what that will do is it will lock it from the visual side, because the editor says, hey, I don't know what to do with this, so I'm not going to do anything. But it lets you go ahead and make the change. And that'll be saved as a revision in the document, so you can always see what it was. And we always have the other fail-safe, which is add an HTML block. But sometimes, the HTML block just isn't as convenient as jumping in, making the change you need, and moving on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there are quite a few bloggers out there that have always fiddled with the HTML, and now, they have this outlet again. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Okay, still on enhancements, the column block. Also, there's been added block gap support. This means that you can now control the space from zero white space to large art gallery style gaps. The space around your columns is an integral part of your layout.
Yeah, it's great. The block gap support is now, it was already in the gallery, and now with 13, it also comes to the columns block. So that's definitely a lot of people were looking for that to control the gutters, so to speak. And then there's this enhancement to the cover block is definitely one that gets me excited, when I can use a cover block dynamically and then add the feature image for the post template. So I can use the cover block as part of my query loop when I want to, or my single post template, when I want the hero image as a background and then the text of the title on top of it. So that wasn't possible before with core block, but now it is. And I'm glad it comes to 6.0 now. The group block has two variations. We know about the row block variation, but now it also has a stack variation. And that is the first time that responsiveness comes in as intrinsic layout or design layout to Gutenberg, and responsiveness is now available for the group block at the stack, which means it kind of, if it stacks it in multiple columns, it's a flex CSS. So you have 4 buttons or 3 columns that are stacked or 3 paragraphs that are in a group block. you can get them to display in a wide screen in 3 columns, but you can also, when you go to the smaller screens, it stacks them, or into 1 column, or into adopts to the width of the screen. And that is definitely a great feature to have now. All right, what I like is that the list block gets a box size border box, which means that you can have a background on a list block, but the list stays where it is. So the content is not padded on left and right like it was with the group block when you needed it before. The list can now handle background color, and this is awesome. The navigation block got some updates, and it added, so when added to the template or template parts, now the default is to grab the first available menu that was created in the background, and when only one exists. So that eliminates a few steps. Before you had to click on it and then select the drop down. There was only one in there. So it's a much faster way to add a navigation block and a menu to the navigation block. It also now supports text decoration like underline or strike through. Why would I strike through a menu item on a navigation block? I think
Builds
it's just
mystery.
it's the mystery of the web, yes. And then with this release, site owners can also add a link description to the navigation link blocks, which is definitely an enhancement, because that could be the beginning of the mega menus that people would like to build with a navigation block, but it's not available yet. But you can add the link description to it. There were also some minor bug fixes, as well as small changes. Also want to highlight that the post comment block that was previously used is now deprecated in favor of the granular post comments blocks, like date and author and content and link. So it will be hidden in the inserter. Although if it's not coming to 6.0, I'm gonna keep an eye on it, that we won't deprecate the post comment block there. The quote block now also supports color, which means background color, text color, and link color. All that is now coming to the quote block. But there's also, and we talk about it later at the experiments, a new version of quote blocks in the experiments that uses inner blocks, which is quite nice. But we'll talk about it later. Yeah.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, it's kind of, we're going through the changelog, so people, when they follow along or go back to the release, they can find it. Okay. So the RSS block got a few enhancements, has now all the missing class names that is needed. You can prepend the HTTP to the URL. Is it HTTPS or is it HTTP? And you can also update them maximum items. I think the RSS block was very rudimentary and it now got a few features in there, enhancements. And the last enhancement that I want to point out, as I said, there are 90 enhancements in this release and about 30 in the block library, 34 in the block library alone. So the last one I wanted to point out is the site logo and the featured image in the post template blocks, the site logo for the theme block and the feature image for the template, post template or page template. They now have duotone in the placeholders. So even if you don't see the image or the logo, you will see that the duotone has been attached to it. There are a few components changes, but to the borders and the border control, as well as the color palette, but they all seem to be quite technical, with most of it not user facing, I think, or you wouldn't know. There is the style sidebar. That's the global, what previously was called global styles, but that's the right sidebar for the template editor or the site editor itself. now has a search in the block types list, and also has labels for the global style variations, and has a tweak in the preview box. I really like when you go through the styles and then you see the preview of the styles. It's really cool. The multi-selection, you can now partially select partials of, for instance, paragraph block, where you have the last line of the top one and then the first line of the second one, and you can highlight those and either make it bold or italic or just delete it, editing over. Yeah, it's only for rich text, I think, but that's a huge improvement on the writing experience in the block editor, definitely. And you can directly link to files stored in the media library by using the link user interface. Oh, what I really like in the document settings in the post editor is there is now a summary panel on top of all the settings, where you can see the featured image, the title, and the excerpt. And I really like that. So you see, yeah, just a glimpse of the final post when you go into the document settings, and before you hit publish, you can see how that is, how it looks. And you can actually have a maximum height control there. All right, Mary, what is the block locking coming up?
Yes, the block locking interface also got some enhancements. So I'm particularly excited about this because what it means is that as a site designer, if you do create your a site for a client with Gutenberg, then you can lock the blocks and prevent the site from breaking the site. I know I've had to do backups to prevent this from happening in the past, so I'm excited about this. So it also got some enhancements. There's PR was introduced to use the use block lock feature. This makes it easier to access lock status. Also, display lock status. You can now display lock status in list view. This is good. And then styling changes have also been introduced for this model. This means you can remove the separator lines. You can increase padding so nested items line up correctly. You can swipe existing icons for locked or unlocked icon indicators, and you can over this block to see that also. Okay, and lastly, reusable block edit locking has also been introduced. This means that you can, there's the option to lock editing for usable blocks as well.
Yeah, it's really great. Yeah, it has been wanted for so long, and now we have these user interfaces. You were able to lock those blocks as a developer in certain ways, but now a site owner can lock the things for their editors, or a theme developer can lock block patterns as well. That's also part of this, I believe. And this is so much cleaner now that people don't. And the reusable block is also important because there were some accidental changes to reusable blocks when added to a poster page, and people didn't know that that was a reusable block. That only when you hit publish, it kind of made them aware that they actually changed something that might have been, and the changes might have replicated over the whole site wherever that particular reusable block was used. So that is really, really helpful. There are some changes also to CSS and styling, and it was a bit in discussion where the block gap UI should reside. Should it be in the global styles or in the layout, or, and I think right now the decision is to have no block gap UI for the global styles, but have the block gap appears on the individual block settings level when it's supported through the theme or the block JSON. And Dennis, if you have something that I found something wrong that I was saying, yeah, please feel free to correct me.
No, I have no correction right there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I didn't see you if you were my faces or not, but yeah. So there's something that the next one was also a change in the block API that allows now multiple view scripts per block. And it seems that's not coming to 6.0. But what does that mean, Dennis? Do you know?
It appears that this is part of work to make sending out different versions of client JavaScript and style sheets for different browsers based on support or whatnot. Again, I'm just skimming the actual PRs here. I think that's the purpose, to be able to optimize. So maybe send a version of the content out to modern browsers that don't need as much backfilling, polyfilling support. But no, I'd have to read more through this. I'm not familiar with that work.
Yeah, okay. It's definitely one of the efforts to reduce the payload of the page when blocks are rendered, and with different contexts, you would need different scripts. Yeah. So the next section is then the changes, enhancements for the patterns. And there is now an option to pick a pattern on page creation, meaning when you hit add new page, the theme could offer you as a site content creator a various block patterns that you can start out with on your page and then fill in the gaps or modify, just have different modifications there. This is definitely a great enhancement. So you don't have to assemble with multiple blocks, but you have that one page, standardized page, or a subset of standardized page views that you can add to your site. And the theme creativity here is, so you can have a landing page and have all the things that you need. You need to hear an image, you have the text, the first flow text, then you have the call to action, and then the pricing list and that. So your content creator wouldn't forget anything, or it will all look the same, and you just have to fill in that text and the data for that particular page. But it only works when you, of course, have patterns that are registered with that. There is in the note, in the PR, you will see how you can check, if you are a plugin developer or a theme developer, how you can check if there are post content patterns available. The API is experimental, so it's not documented, and there is no promise that it will stay that way. So just as a caveat for that particular thing. And the theme export has gotten a number of features. It converts spaces into tabs. With the theme JSON, it declares a version number. If the theme declares a version number, then the schema link will be added. It restores the appearance tools when exporting the theme that got missed in the first version of it. And now it also sorts the theme JSON properties alphabetically, so you can find things, but it looks a little weirder. And these theme export features from Gutenberg 13 have been backported to come into WordPress 6.0. And the last enhancement part is the web fonts API. And right now there's a discussion that it probably won't make it into WordPress 6.0 because it didn't make it to beta 1 and there was feature freeze. And that's such a huge new API that it's probably not going to make it to 6.0 because it hasn't been tested all that much. But you can use it with a Gutenberg plugin. So go ahead and start testing it. You can register the web fonts with a style variation. It will register and queue the fonts by font family, and it will only register the fonts that are required to render the blocks that are present on this page. And there are also a number of optimizations for the HTTP requests when grouping fonts by font family. Then we have 43 bug fixes in this release. And one of them, I mentioned that I like all the new features for the list view, but the list view is now one of the most used sections of the block editor, I find. And if you don't just write the blog post, and it really starts getting immensely powerful when using it in the context of template creation. There's now the multi-block selection and collapsible expanding section that was in 12.9 makes handling multiple blocks much easier. You can move them all together. You can drag and drop them to wherever you want to drop them, especially when they are nested ones, like with columns or group blocks. We have all these nested blocks where you kind of hit and miss when you're in the canvas or in your content, but it's very easy to point them out on the list view. It now also paints a little box around it, around the block. When you hit them in the list view, on the canvas, it shows you where you are, where the block is. That's really neat. That might have been long there before, but I just saw it when I tested it. You also see the lock you cannot move the blocks when they are locked, which is certainly wanted, and you see the lock next to the block that are locked. Say that 15 times, block that are locked and are locked. And now you can also, there's a better CSS targetability. I don't know if that's a real word, but you can now, if you style the editor or want to style the list view, you could target the title of the block with CSS, which I find kind of neat. Are there any other bug fixes that stand out? There's so many.
There's one I think hinted at in limiting the slug to Latin characters. There are some fixes in place, particularly prominent when people are pasting from something like Word or Google Docs.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you'd get a funny object character that isn't quite a letter and looks weird. So I know people have been working on that just to smooth over one headache. Sometimes if you did that, it wouldn't necessarily appear in the editor, but when it creates the site slug, it adds some extra content you didn't want. So that should be patched up now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so sometimes you find yourself having emojis in there. That wouldn't work. Yeah. Well, thank you for pointing that out. Awesome. So there are, I'm skipping over a few of the bug fixes and jump right to the developer experience. There were a few adjustments to the schemas for block JSON as well as for the theme JSON schema. That the block JSON now has an ancestor prop and also a supports lock property that is added to the schema. So you can manage that as well. And the theme JSON now adds an avatar to the schema, as well as the title key is now part of the internationalization as well. And that's the title key for the pattern that are mentioned in the theme JSON, which is a feature that came in 12.9, but this is definitely an oversight to make it international, translatable for the internationalization. And we come to the experiments of the section we didn't have an experiment section for so long in the plugin repository, in the plugin release. And now you have to switch them on when you install the plugin, and you have to go to the menu that says Gutenberg. And then there is one item there, experiments, and you get two things. One is the list block version 2, and the other one is the quote block version 2. And both experiments deal with having different other blocks in the list, like you can have images or paragraphs or lists. No, that wouldn't work. But you can also use all the other blocks or some other blocks also in the quote and have inner block support.
We can see what's going on is the great implosion of core blocks right now, because we're taking all these other blocks and stuffing them inside. So these two experiments are exciting. They're experimental because if we were to actually go ahead and do this, we'd make these changes now. There's additional roadblocks with backwards compatibility. So we're actually building the framework to the point where we'll be able to do these in the future without as many steps. But HTML allows arbitrary nesting of list content and quote content. So like you said, I know me personally, I use Gutenberg every day for my work journal. I track what I do, and a lot of times I have bullet points. And something I want to do all the time is add a code block inside of a list item. And that's not possible unless I just create it as text. It doesn't get the highlighting. So with quotes and lists, the work is kind of ongoing to be able to embed these things in another. Like maybe you want to quote someone quoting someone else. So to me, this is really exciting. The image gallery is using inner blocks now, and we're just getting to that point where all these things are embracing the fundamental nestability to expand what was until now kind of an arbitrary limitation. Like there's no reason we can't add a image inside of a list block. So keep an eye on these. They're experiments again because they introduce some backwards compatibility problems that hopefully will be fixed by the time they're done being experiments. But check it out because there's a lot of UI and interaction challenges to solve. Lots of feedback would help with that. So it's exciting.
Yeah, I'm totally excited about that too. Yeah, especially for the quotes. You sometimes want to have just a little image of the person that you're quoting there, or yeah, it's a description of the quote is a description of a picture, and then the picture needs to be someplace else. And the code list block in the list is definitely a great use case for that. Yes. And I see the compatibility problems that I think Glenn Davis ran into that when he was working on the gallery block, the second version of the gallery block, when image blocks came into it, and then how to transform them back and forth from the version 1 to version 2 and keep some of those settings as well. And it was quite the undertaking. So, but that, I can see that the learned lessons there will introduce also for list and a quote version 2.
Yeah, and hopefully moving forward, we won't have to have these very long transitions as more blocks adopt the inner blocks.
Yeah, it came late. Inner blocks came much later to the block editor. It came with the columns block, but it was a little different implementation before it came to the block editor. Yeah.
Interestingly, just a small historical bit there. The inner blocks were technically supported by the editors since some of the earliest days, but none of the blocks used them, and a lot of the UI functionality lagged behind. There are actually some more interesting opportunities we have to unlock in the future if we want to add some complexity into the inner block system that currently, again, there's no support in the UI. But the future compatibility is there, giving us some choice. So just a fun tidbit you can pull me aside at a WordCamp if you want to talk about.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. Yeah, and then there's another experimental block patterns that to load the block patterns via the REST API. And that's the part when the pattern comes from the directory. Is that I highlighted it, but then I forgot about what it was. But
there's going to be a lot of utility to gain from loading more of these things from the API because there's a lot of context where we don't need them. And so, ideally we only load the code that we want to use when we use it. So this is kind of working towards that end to make it easier to kind of dynamically load some of this stuff to make the editor boot faster.
Awesome. Yes. Cool. So there are quite a few documentation changes coming in. Some are minor, some are fixes, typos, or grammar fixes. And then there were some code quality changes. Those were, they're quite technical and I'm not sure user facing. Yeah, I didn't highlight any of that, but Dennis, you wanted to talk about the core data piece and the migration to TypeScript. What is it about?
Well, this is a very developer-centric change, but in the past few sprints of work here, we've been doing a lot of work with TypeScript in the core system, in the data system, both in the package called data and the package called core data, which gets confusing. Basically, we're trying to incorporate more and more TypeScript into the project for the sake of making Gutenberg's internal APIs more self-documenting. So if we step back a moment and we think about what TypeScript is and why it's used in the project, fundamentally, types in the programming sense are about automating safety and automating bug detection. And to that end, the project has a long history of using a type system embedded in JavaScript through comments. And that has worked out fairly well. TypeScript is taking that one step beyond, which introduces a host of ergonomic enhancements for developers to remove some of the ad hoc nature of the way that we've described the types in the JavaScript and make them a first-class citizen. Some of those affordances open up, or at least make other avenues a lot easier to get, which is what I'm interested in, and that is the self-documenting nature, because just as types allow the computer to understand our code better, to make different checks for quality, when it understands that, it can also communicate back to us. And so the work going on in core data revolves around adding typed information to get entity record and its family of functions. So for developers who are doing things like grabbing a post from the server, or grabbing a list of tags, or interacting with this entity system that exists there in Gutenberg, what these changes are going to mean are a couple of major things. Number one, when you tell Gutenberg to get an entity, it's going to tell you what entities are available to get. Whereas before, a lot of time you had to know what you wanted or start reading the source code to figure out what's there. And the second thing is it's going to tell you what data you get back. So when you make that request, you'll get an object, and your text editor, your IDE, can tell you what properties are available and what kind those properties are. Some of that work isn't going to land in 6, but the foundations are being put in there. And the flip side in data is the same kind of stuff, except instead of focusing on API calls, it's work on the store. So if you're writing a block and you want to get information out, like the block list or the list of inner blocks or the site title, and you're using select and dispatch, what this is going to lead to is when you type select, it's going to tell you which stores are available to select from, and then it's going to tell you which selectors are available, and then it's going to tell you which arguments are necessary, and it's going to tell you the kind of data it returns. So in this kind of process, there's been a lot of low-level preparatory work, fixing things as mundane as our documentation generator for the project that builds the docs on the block handbook, fixing different linting issues, fixing different systems that, like tests, that all kind of break in these weird specific ways. And there's a couple of big PRs out there for kind of hitting the magic. And as soon as all this preparatory work is done, those PRs will get in, and people will be able to start interacting in the source code the way that you might be able to if you open up the developer console in a running site and kind of explore what's in the state.
Yeah, I got the high level concept of that. And I think one question is probably in other developers' minds as well. Do I have to learn TypeScript on top of JavaScript to actually interact with the Gutenberg block editor and building blocks?
That's a good question, and one everyone asks. And there's different ways to respond to this. One way is, if you've been developing in Gutenberg to some extent, you've already been working with TypeScript, because the way that the project has chosen to mark the types of the functions and the data is actually being processed by TypeScript and uses TypeScript language. They just do it in a way that doesn't change the JavaScript from being JavaScript. The second part of that is, for the most part, the effort that's going on is what I consider the ideal goal. We're shooting for the maximum benefit from the type system with a minimum amount of effort to use it, which means things like you won't have to be working in TypeScript when you write your code. But if you happen to call get entity record, or get editable entity record, or dispatch editor store dot update block or select block, what this means is that information is going to be drawn out of the core project and presented to you, because almost every IDE and code editor these days is able to kind of read that information without you having to write into it.
So it's actually really a tool. You don't have to know everything because your IDE is kind of picking up all the information, and you will see what the attributes are or what any of the additional information. That's wonderful. Yeah, and yeah, thank you for doing all the underpinnings to that so it can come.
It's really about documentation and making, lowering the barrier to getting involved in some of the core systems that Gutenberg has to offer. And in fact, while we're making these changes, because the more we embrace TypeScript's type system, the more our mentality is about understanding the reality of what's there in the code and building a mental model to work with it. So as we do this, as we have to kind of put our archaeologist hat on and figure out, well, what actually is expected here? What actually uses these properties? How are they passed around? It's giving us the chance to go back and document a lot of code that was built in stages, organically, and oftentimes in haste. And those documentation updates are going to present themselves when you're writing the code. So kind of the way we're talking about the style, the theme style variation selector, and closing the feedback loop. This is the same thing. Let's get people out of the source code. Let's get people out of a handbook, and let's put the documentation and the guidelines and the instructions and examples right in your editor at the cursor where you're pointing it or where it happens to be.
So what are the editors who would support that? I know VS Code definitely would be. What about Atom?
Yeah, it would almost be more, it would almost be an easier exercise to indicate which editors don't.
Okay.
So Microsoft's Notepad, to my knowledge, doesn't have support for this. I don't think the old Unix, Linux editors, Pico and Nano, or the Stream editor, but yeah, Vim and Emacs will support it. Anything that supports Microsoft's language server protocol will support it. All of the JetBrains software supports it. Atom, Eclipse, pretty much everything universally supports it these days.
Excellent. Yeah, and now you have it, listeners. Listeners, we dove into the underpinnings of Gutenberg, and we are not done yet. But this was the Gutenberg changelog of the plugin release 13, and of course we have the show note release post from Adam Zielinski, and yeah, we also saw the discussion in the release fonts. I think I mentioned it already that the web fonts API probably won't be in the 6.0 as the feature hasn't received any meaningful testing yet because it was just coming into parts of Gutenberg. Yeah, and that concludes also our section, what's released. And we come to what's in active development or in discussion. And that was now, Dennis, you posted a proposal, and that's why you are on the show actually right now. That was the trigger why I asked you to come onto the show, because you were exploring something that was missing and still is we have these, so Gutenberg takes away a lot of mystery meat from the old WordPress, not old, but the classic WordPress kind of thing. Yeah, what is a widget? What is a shortcut? What is all the sidebar items and all that. And with the short code, there's the handling of, okay, whatever is in a shortcode, you can put in a block and it's a much better interface. But there are certain things are missing, or dynamic content pieces that are in the flow text, in the paragraph, in the rich text. So that's kind of the overall thing. Is that what you have been working on with this inline token proposal?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned shortcodes, because the best way right now that I'm framing this work in my head is this is kind of like Shortcuts 2.0. So when we started Gutenberg, what we observed is that by and large, shortcodes were somewhat abused in order to build structure into HTML documents. Now, the shortcode system didn't work very well. That post, Gutenberg post on HTML, has a sister post that I wrote called shortcode shortcomings. It goes into some of the details about why shortcodes failed to build layout and structure. So we built the block model, and the block model captures the essence of what was lacking. And we all moved to blocks. Well, guess what? On the other end of the spectrum, we have some, let's call it abuse of the block model to add essentially what's inline content, to add what shortcodes were really good at. And blocks live on their own. They're kind of heavyweight, they're high level. And one of the things that shortcodes are good at is adding something very simple, generally plain text, such as the site title, the author name, the date of the week. And so this has kind of been a long known deficiency in Gutenberg, and there have been some experiments over the years to try and figure out what it means to implement a system for bringing in this other content. And it's content that kind of has some identity on its own. A site title is a site title. It's not an image block site title. It's not a quote block site title. It's just the site title. The featured image is mostly just a URL of the featured image. It just comes from outside of the post, and it's not tied to the block for the most part. So in this proposal, we're looking at kind of ideas of how we can realize this on a technical level and gather input to kind of figure out what people want from this system. It turns out, like most things, there's a wide array of use cases people have in mind. And a lot of this work is just decluttering those needs and trying to identify what the different specific needs are and if they're actually the same or if they're not. So it's really early on, I'd say, in its design stage, but I'm actually full of anticipation. I think this is going to turn into something that we'll see used everywhere, and hopefully will make it trivial for people to write their own plugin to register these tokens or these shortcodes to change things. People are wanting to do things like write email newsletters that include merge fields like you'd use in Word to address each email recipient, and obviously pulling in parts of your site or post information inside the loop as we build templates for full site editing, those kind of things.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about it. And when you, dear listeners, want to follow along on the proposals, you also see that Dennis shared quite a few code examples how this could play out. Yeah, how would this play out in a plugin or in a block, or kind of the token in even the comments in the block, how that would show up. So it's very tangible to read as a developer, and it also helps you a little bit visualize how it can end up exactly as you said, as a merge tag in the newsletter glue plugin that we've, for instance, used on the Gutenberg Times. So how has the reception been? There were a few comments there. What are the roadblocks there? What's the difficulty in the decision how to go?
There's a lot of people working on this problem, and there's a lot of people I think that this problem is important to. And so we're starting to get some input, and I really appreciate that. I would say where we're at right now, the roadblock is the typical design process. Like this is the way it works. And I like to repeat, good designs are discovered, or good APIs, good interfaces are discovered, they're not designed. And so it's real easy for us to just think of something, code it up, and get it working and push it out there. And it probably does what we intended it to do in a limited circumstance, in a limited subset of all possible circumstances. And what we're trying to do here is go a different way, which it's funny you mentioned that there's code examples in the discussion thread, because there's no actual implementation code yet. I think I started prototyping some parts of these ideas a little bit, but didn't save that code kind of intentionally. The whole idea is, let's get together, let's write the code that we think we wish we could write, toss it into the stew, kind of shake it around and see if the way that we have been talking about these ideas actually matches the model that we have when we write the code to use it. And so I'd say one of the bigger roadblocks right now is trying to understand, is it the same problem or are there two problems in kind of author introduced tokens? In other words, I'm writing a paragraph. I want to insert the date that the post was published. So I say, when I wrote this blog post on, insert the token publish date, on January 13th, comma, I was racing to get back to normal life after the New Year's. Okay, there's one definite concrete use case we have, but what happens if I'm writing my own block and I want my image to be able to draw its source from the featured image? Well, that wouldn't make sense, but let's say draw its source from some AI system that's a plugin I wrote that goes and asks a computer to give me an image for the post. It may not be a great example, but
no, but
in that context, I've statically encoded somewhere in the code, this thing can accept tokens. Are those the same problem? Are they different? And, where's the line between what I as a developer want to use as tokens versus what I as an author want to use as tokens?
Yeah, I find myself with the block editor always kind of thinking, okay, a developer would do that, but do we need a UI for it? Yeah, it's the same thing. And I like what you said, that the designs are actually only discovered and not built. Was that them? Am I quoting you right?
I misquoted myself when I first said it, but I said good interfaces or good APIs are discovered, they're not designed.
Yeah, it's a parallel to the system Bible, where it says pathways to success can only be found, not made. Yeah, it's system built, and you build systems, so it's kind of an interesting field of tension. Yeah, kind of, do we go all in or do we start small? Where is that? Yeah, it's interesting to see. Yeah, well, thank you so much for the proposal. And what is it? What is it that you ask from our listeners if they're interested in that, to read and comment?
Well, it's always good to have diverse input. How do you use these things? What do you wish you could do that you can't do right now? What do you do right now that is frustrating or cumbersome to do, where you have that impulse that says, there's got to be a better way to do this? And this is specifically around tokens, short codes. Sometimes they call these pills because they're drawn, with a contrasting background with rounded corners. Google Docs, not too long ago, introduced the ability to insert some of these things. And, various other editors have added this support. We had a very, very limited web page title builder on WordPress.com where we used that. So we didn't like, when you're in WordPress and you're telling it how to generate the HTML title, we didn't like, bracket, 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 curly bracket, Omaha site title. We found that confusing and error prone. So we built a little token based entry, and that captures the essence of what we want here. But there's a deceitfulness in that simplicity of the end result. And so really just people sharing what they want, what they've seen, what they've done. We have one person on that thread who actually wrote a plugin to do this in some form, and we've kind of been talking back and forth. Okay, are you solving the same problem as core? Are you solving a subset of it? And this is all that we can do right now, is kind of figure out what problem we're trying to solve. And it could turn out that it's just way simpler than I'm making it in this proposal. There could be one really simple problem and a separate, much more complicated problem that at a glance look the same. So just kind of talking and figuring that out is going to be the critical help and the critical way to move it forward.
And it's also kind of going through the plugin repository and see what kind of solutions people came up with, and kind of see, is it possible to do this with a token system or not? Yeah. was probably another research angle to that. Yes. All right. Anything else you want our listeners to know about the proposal, about Gutenberg, about your work, or do you have any other announcements? Because I'm thinking we are all already 60 minutes in, if not longer, to come to the end of our show.
I don't need to bore anyone with more discussion, but again, I'm happy to chat in person or on WordPress Slack. My username is @dmsnell. So if people want to dig into some technical or philosophical points about it, about the data flow, about the block model, about the editor in general, they're welcome to reach out to me.
Thank you. And Mary, you haven't said a whole lot of things today. Sorry about that. But is there anything that you, on your work for the last 2 weeks, that you would like our listeners to know that is not so much Gutenberg related, but also, of course, Gutenberg related?
Yeah, not so much, Birgit. I think I'm very quiet today. I apologize for that. But I actually, I went through the proposal that Dennis shared. I think it would be good to be able to select an image to use as a featured image every time you publish a post, or because before now you would have to like put a featured image. Like if you share the post to Facebook, or I'm speaking from a writer's perspective, it'd be nice to be able to think of it as a block instead of just a featured image, because sometimes I have to go look for a code to disable featured image totally, because you do some things and then they would show them, and then you also have your image in the person. You're like, no, I want this one to be the featured image and not this one. So from a user's perspective and a non-developer perspective, that's my opinion. I think it would be great to have that thought of as a block instead of just a featured image.
Yeah, that's an interesting use case.
Yeah, a quick follow-up to that. Part of the motivation for prioritizing this work now is being able to use these in block patterns. So a lot of times we want to pull in a pattern with default data, and okay, I would really just like to plop in this page heading pattern that references the featured image or references the site title. And so currently there's not a good way to do that. So yeah, just kind of like what you're saying, but even to the next level of building reusable block patterns that we could potentially share on the marketplace.
All right. Well, before we end the show, I want to remind everyone there are 3 calls for testing that could use your attention and also your feedback. If you get in half an hour or even an hour, test the beta, WordPress 6.0 beta 1, or next week the beta 2, and the instructions on how to do that are in the posts that we share in the show notes. And of course, every time you have do this, I would be available to, if you have questions, at BPH in the WordPress Slack or on Twitter. My DMs are open. And as always, the show notes will be published on gutenbergtimes.com/podcast. And this is the podcast 65, gutenbergtimes.com/podcast. And if you have questions and suggestions or news that you want us to include, send them to changelog@gutenbergtimes.com. Yes, that's an email address. That's changelog@gutenbergtimes.com. Thank you so much, Dennis, for all your explanations and being on the show with us. I really appreciated all the depth of knowledge that you have. Thank you, Mary, for coming and being our co-host. And thank everybody for listening. And goodbye.